This talk, I think, can be aligned successfully with both with what Adrian said, especially in the discussion at the very end, and with what Bart said. But I'm trying to do this from a rather different level, pertaining primarily to the role of money. So the idea is that the national income statistics created by different governments standardly use a distinction between goods on the one hand and services on the other hand. And they have a nice definition of both of these things. They also have a third class, which is called other, but we'll ignore that. So goods are material things like bottles of milk. Services are processes, but they're defined by the fact that production and consumption coincide. So when I go to the hairdresser, I consume what the hairdresser is providing for me for money at the very same time that he produces it. So goods can be consumed later. Services have to be consumed at the very same time that they are produced. I really liked this definition, but more recently I've come to see that it's only partially correct. In other words, there are kinds of services, a very important kind, which do not fit this definition. Now, first of all, we have to say that goods themselves always involve a service component in the sense that when you buy something, then the salesperson provides a service. This lady here is providing a service of selling you a car. And so that there is an entanglement between goods and services already at this pecuniary level where money is involved. Now, these are cases of pure services, cases where production and consumption do coincide. So you go to a comedy performance, the performer produces the performance, and you consume the performance simultaneously. There's nothing left over. You may feel a bit happy, but there's nothing left over, which is exactly what we mean by a pure service. There is no output of the service which endures for longer than the service itself. So let's see how this works for social work. So you go for an interview with a social worker because you have a need. You need money or education or housing or whatever it might be. Then there are different sorts of outcomes, which are possible. So they give you money, and that is not a pure service because the money you can give away, you can lend it, you can use it to buy something, and that's rather like a good. So this particular process has an output, namely you get some money. And I think this case applies to all forms of public assistance. So whether it's food or food stamps or subsidies for childcare or rent, it's the same pattern. So this too is not a pure service. There's something left over. But something is more like a good. A home is a good. It's made of matter. It survives. You can sell it in principle. All right. But what about those cases where the social worker gives you advice? And let's focus on the case where you accept the advice. The other case is not interesting for our present purposes. So you get some advice and you accept it. Let's assume it's also good advice. Then what happens is that you acquire a new disposition. Your behavior pattern changes in light of the advice provided by the social worker. This is a good thing. And here, there is something which is left over, which survives for the future, namely your new disposition. So this is not a pure service. This is a social service which produces something, namely a new pattern in the behavior of a client. Now, we find this pattern also in many other kinds of services, which are traditionally treated as classical services. So when you go to the hairdresser, she creates a new pattern on your head. And when you hire a gardener, she creates a new pattern in your garden. And so the idea is that the social worker, when she gives you the advice, creates a new pattern in your brain. Now, these are special things. They're not goods because you can't buy and sell them or lend them. They're not alienable. They are tied to the thing which acquires the new pattern. In other words, in BFO terms, they are specifically dependent continuants. And they look a bit like this. So patterns are qualities in BFO terms. The BFO material entity gives us the goods here, as well as the persons and the families who enjoy those goods. And then the service is a special kind of process. And we'll work with this arrangement a little bit more as we go along. So the disposition that the client acquires because of the following the advice is realized in certain kinds of processes, but also the disposition, which is the expertise of the social worker, is realized in certain processes, namely giving you this advice, and that is the service. The output of the service is the new pattern on your head. All right, so there are types of services: pure services, the pop concert, pecuniary services, buying and selling, and then pattern generating services. And I would say that a lot of what the social worker is doing is pattern generating, either immediately or successively. For instance, when the social worker helps you to get language training so that you can speak the language of your new country and so forth. All right, but now this creates a question. Is it good enough for the service worker just to create these patterns? Or are there other things which the social worker needs to do? And again, we'll work with this picture for a minute. So the expert, the social worker, has a capability which is realized in the service, which has an output in your brain, namely a certain kind of pattern. But then the social worker doesn't just go away. She's concerned to monitor your behavior to see whether you are following this pattern, whether the disposition has been anchored in your behavioral patterns and so forth. And what this means is that whenever any kind of service creates a pattern, then there follows certain other kinds of service which are there to protect or repair or restore the pattern. So that social work is not merely generating new patterns of behavior, it's also doing these other things. And we can see how this works, not merely in social work, but in all kinds of work. So the curator of your Instagram page, who is an expert, creates a new pattern for your Instagram page, and that's what she does for a living. But then a police person protects the pattern, which is your safety or your ability to travel with large amounts of money from one bank to another and so on. And then the car repair service is a service which preserves the pattern of your car, or which repairs it, which makes it go back to the way it should be if it's going to drive properly. And then the art restorer restores the original pattern of the painting. So these four kinds of pattern-related services are found in many different kinds of activity. So gardening, we already have seen. Dentistry is a good one. So you go for cosmetic dentistry, or you go to get a mouth guard to protect your teeth, or you go to prevent certain kinds of caries by being trained in correct flossing, or you go to have your fillings so that your original tooth pattern is restored. And this applies to all medicine. So there's cosmetic medicine, preventive medicine, therapeutic medicine, and restorative medicine. This is not by any means related to only social services, but in social services, we have some interesting cases. And this actually corresponds to some work on classifying social services, which is independent from what I'm doing now, but which is a nice support that we might be on the right lines. So creative social work is where the social worker creates a new pattern for you. She decides that you will be really good as an Instagram page curator, and that will solve your problems of finding a job. Or protective. So she might feel a need to report your child to Child Protective Services. That is protective pattern social work. And then preventive means that the social worker is going to counsel you on family problems. And restorative, this is restoring the patterns of healthy development which have been damaged because of the area of the town where you live or whatever it might be, which is causing problems. All right, so I think we're nearly done. This is the starting point. So we have a client or a family, a child, who has a certain kind of need. And the working out the ontology of need in terms of patterns is not something that I've done yet, but it's something like a pattern shortfall. Or there could be a shortfall in the pattern of behavior, a shortfall in the disposition in your brain, a shortfall on the side of material goods. All of these I'm going to view rather vaguely as a matter of pattern shortfall. And then we start with the pattern shortfall. The person goes to visit the social worker. The social worker addresses this pattern shortfall by means, for instance, of some kind of restorative service. And this has an output, which is a new pattern in which the shortfall is addressed.